I stared at my phone in complete disbelief, reading the text message for the third time. My parents had just informed me that they were giving our grandmother's $400,000 house to my sister Amber because she deserved it more as the artistic one in the family. But here was the kicker that made my blood run cold. They expected me to pay the $2,800 monthly mortgage because I had the stable job. My fingers trembled as I typed back my response, "Ask the owner." I had no idea that those 3 simple words would unleash a legal nightmare that would expose years of manipulation, fraud, and family betrayal beyond my wildest imagination. Looking back, I should have seen this coming. My name is Tracy, and at 28 years old, I had spent my entire life watching my parents worship the ground my sister Amber walked on while treating me like an obligation they reluctantly fulfilled. Growing up, the differences in how we were treated were so stark that even strangers noticed. When Amber wanted dance lessons at age 7, my parents immediately enrolled her in the most expensive studio in town. When I asked for piano lessons that same year, they told me we couldn't afford it and handed me a library book about music instead. Amber got designer clothes for school while I shopped at thrift stores. She received a brand new car for her 16th birthday, while I worked nights at a grocery store to save up for a used Honda with 150,000 miles on it. The pattern continued through college. My parents paid every penny of Amber's tuition to art school, bought her supplies, covered her rent, and sent her spending money. Meanwhile, I worked 3 jobs while maintaining a 4.0 grade point average, graduating summa cum laude with a finance degree and $30,000 in student loans that I paid off myself. When Amber dropped out halfway through her junior year to find herself, my parents supported her decision completely. They funded her failed pottery business to the tune of $15,000. They paid her rent for 2 solid years when she decided retail work was beneath her artistic spirit. They bought her a nearly new Subaru when her boyfriend crashed the car they had given her for her birthday. Through it all, my achievements were either ignored or diminished. When I landed my first job as a financial analyst at a respected firm, earning $65,000 annually, my mother, Patricia's response was, "Well, money isn't everything, dear. Your sister has such a beautiful soul." When I bought my own 1-bedroom apartment at 25, becoming the first person in our family to own property before 30, my father Robert simply grunted and changed the subject to Amber's latest art project. The favoritism wasn't even subtle. Family gatherings revolved around Amber's stories and adventures. She could do no wrong in their eyes. If she showed up 3 hours late to dinner, it was because she was pursuing inspiration. When I arrived 10 minutes late due to work running over, I got lectured about responsibility and respect for family time. 6 months ago, my grandmother passed away and left her beautiful colonial home to my parents. The house sat on 2 acres in a desirable neighborhood worth approximately $400,000. I assumed they would sell it and use the money to secure their retirement, or perhaps split the proceeds between Amber and me. I never imagined they would give the entire property to one child while expecting the other to pay for it. But that's exactly what happened. Last week, they quietly transferred the deed to Amber without telling me. She immediately quit her part-time job at a boutique, announcing on social media that she was finally free to focus on her true calling as an artist. Meanwhile, I discovered that my parents had been telling our extended family for weeks that I had volunteered to cover the mortgage payments as a generous gift to my sister. I found this out when my Aunt Linda called to praise me for my incredible sacrifice and sisterly love. Confused, I asked what she meant, and she explained that my parents had told everyone at the last family barbecue that I was so successful and generous that I had insisted on paying for Amber's new house so she could pursue her dreams without financial stress. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my parents given away a family inheritance without consulting me, but they had also fabricated a story that painted me as the willing benefactor of their favoritism. Family members I rarely saw had been singing my praises for weeks, completely unaware that I knew nothing about this arrangement until I received that text message demanding payment. As I sat in my small apartment that night, surrounded by the furniture I had carefully saved up to buy, and the diploma I had earned through my own hard work, the full weight of the situation crashed over me. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about a lifetime of being treated as the lesser daughter, the one whose feelings and future didn't matter as much as Amber's happiness. The climactic realization that my parents had been lying to the entire family about my involvement shattered something inside me. I had always known they favored Amber, but I never realized they would go so far as to make me the villain if I didn't play along with their schemes. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the family doormat. The next morning, I called my parents and demanded an explanation. My mother, Patricia, answered on the first ring, her voice immediately taking on that syrupy, sweet tone she used when she knew she was in trouble. "Oh, Tracy, honey, we were just about to call you. We know this might seem sudden, but we thought you would understand. You're so responsible and successful, and Amber needs this chance to really flourish as an artist. You know how much this means to her." "Mom, you gave away a $400,000 house without even discussing it with me, and now you expect me to pay nearly $3,000 a month for it. How does that make any sense?" "Well, sweetheart, it's not like we're asking you to buy the house yourself. It's just the monthly payment, and you make such good money. Amber can't afford that kind of expense right now, and we're on a fixed income. We thought family helped family." When my father Robert got on the phone, his approach was completely different. Gone was my mother's manipulative sweetness, replaced by outright aggression and guilt trips that made my stomach turn. "Tracy, I'm disappointed in your attitude. Your sister finally has a real opportunity to make something of herself, and all you can think about is money. We raised you better than this. You should be happy for Amber instead of acting selfish and jealous." "Dad, I'm not jealous. I'm confused about why you think it's reasonable to give one child a house and expect the other child to pay for it. Would you have asked Amber to pay my mortgage if the situation was reversed? That's different. You chose a career path that makes good money. Amber is an artist. She contributes beauty to the world instead of just chasing dollars like some people." The conversation went downhill from there. My parents revealed that they had already contacted the mortgage company and informed them that I would be taking over the payments. They had given my contact information and told the bank representative that I would be calling to set up automatic withdrawals from my account. "You did what—" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You committed me to a mortgage payment without asking me first. We knew you'd do the right thing once you thought about it," my mother said. "We just wanted to make sure everything was set up properly. The first payment is due next week." But the deeper I dug into the situation, the more disturbing information came to light. My parents admitted they couldn't afford the mortgage payments themselves, but when I suggested they ask Amber to get a job or take back the house, they became defensive and hostile. "We can't take it back now," my father said. "Amber has already started planning renovations. She's so excited about turning the sunroom into her art studio. We can't crush her dreams like that." "What renovations?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. My mother's voice became evasive. "Oh, just some updating. You know how old houses need work. Amber has such a good eye for design." Through careful questioning, I learned that Amber had already hired contractors to begin extensive renovations. She was planning to tear out walls, install expensive lighting, and completely redo the kitchen and bathrooms. The estimated cost was over $70,000 money that my parents didn't have, but somehow expected to materialize. "Where is she getting the money for renovations if she can't afford the mortgage?" I asked. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, my mother whispered, "She thought maybe you could help with that too, since you're doing so well financially." My blood pressure spiked. Not only did they expect me to pay the mortgage on a house I would never own, but they also wanted me to fund Amber's expensive renovations. The entitlement was breathtaking. But the worst revelation came when I started calling other family members to understand how this situation had developed. My cousin Jake told me that Amber had been actively campaigning for the house for months, telling relatives that she deserved it more than me because I already had everything and she had nothing. She made it sound like you were too proud to help the family, Jake explained. She said you thought you were better than everyone because you went to college and had a good job. She painted this picture of you as someone who looked down on her artistic pursuits. My Uncle Tom shared a similar story. Amber came to me a few weeks ago asking if I thought it was fair that some people get all the breaks while others struggle to follow their dreams. She said she hoped that someday her family would recognize her worth instead of always favoring the practical child. The manipulation was sophisticated and thorough. Amber had spent months poisoning family relationships and building a narrative that portrayed her as the underdog victim and me as the privileged favorite. She'd convinced my parents that giving her the house was a matter of fairness rather than favoritism. Then came the climactic twist that made everything clear. My Aunt Linda called me that evening with information that changed everything. She'd been cleaning out some old family photos when she discovered something disturbing. Tracy, I found some documents in the box with the photos. It looks like Amber has been forging your signature on family papers for months. There's an agreement here that says you volunteered to cover household expenses for your parents. It's dated 3 months ago and has your signature on it, but Linda, I've seen your handwriting my whole life, and this isn't it. My hands shook as she described the document. Amber had created a fake agreement stating that I had committed to paying various family expenses as a way of giving back for all the advantages I had received growing up. The document outlined a monthly payment schedule that included contributions to my parents' utility bills, grocery expenses, and home maintenance costs. Did my parents know about this? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. According to what I'm looking at here, they both signed it as witnesses. Tracy, there's no way they didn't know this signature was forged. The betrayal was complete. My parents had not only participated in giving away my inheritance, but they had also been complicit in a scheme involving forged documents that committed me to ongoing financial obligations I had never agreed to. They had watched Amber forge my signature and said nothing. They had used that fake document to justify their decision to give her the house and expect me to pay for it. That night, I sat in my living room staring at the wall, trying to process the magnitude of what had been done to me. This wasn't just favoritism or poor judgment. This was deliberate fraud orchestrated by my own sister and enabled by my own parents. They had stolen my inheritance and tried to trick me into paying for it through forged documents and emotional manipulation. But as the shock wore off, it was replaced by something much more dangerous, cold, calculating determination. If my family wanted to play games with legal documents and financial fraud, they had picked the wrong person to mess with. I was a financial analyst who understood contracts, banking, and legal procedures better than any of them, and I was about to use every bit of that knowledge to fight back. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and called the most respected attorney in town. Sarah Chen had built her reputation handling complex family law cases and financial disputes. When I explained my situation over the phone, she immediately asked me to come in that afternoon with any documents I could gather. "Bring everything," she said. "Bank statements, family legal papers, anything with signatures on it. What you're describing sounds like it could constitute elder financial abuse and identity theft." I spent the morning gathering every piece of family-related paperwork I could find. Bank statements showing money transfers to Amber copies of the forged agreements Linda had discovered text messages from my parents about the house situation and records of all the times they had asked me to loan money to my sister over the years. Sarah's office was professional and calming with law books lining the walls and family photos on her desk. She was in her early 40s with graying hair and kind eyes that somehow made me feel safe for the first time in weeks. As I spread the documents across her conference table, her expression grew increasingly serious. "Tracy, this is much worse than family drama," she said after reviewing the papers for an hour. These forged signatures constitute identity theft, which is a felony. The financial manipulation of your parents could qualify as elder abuse. And if your parents used your credit information to secure that second mortgage without your knowledge, that's mortgage fraud. Wait, what second mortgage? Sarah pointed to a document I had overlooked in the pile. This shows that your parents took out a second mortgage against their current home 2 months ago. Look at the application. It lists you as a co-signer and guarantor, but this signature doesn't match the others I've seen from you today. My stomach dropped. I had never co-signed anything for my parents, and I certainly hadn't agreed to guarantee their debts. But according to the bank documents, I was legally responsible for a $60,000 loan they had taken against their own house. They used that money to pay for Amber's renovations and living expenses. Sarah continued pointing to bank records that showed large cash withdrawals and transfers. Your parents essentially used your creditworthiness to fund your sister's lifestyle, and now they're facing foreclosure on their own home if they can't make the payments. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Sarah spent the next 2 hours walking me through document after document that revealed the true extent of Amber's manipulation. She had not only forged my signature on family agreements, but had also used my personal information to open credit cards, take out loans, and even attempt to access my bank accounts. Your sister has been systematically stealing your identity for months, Sarah explained. She's accumulated approximately $60,000 in debt using your name and credit history. Your parents either participated willingly or were manipulated into providing the personal information she needed. The evidence was overwhelming. Credit card applications with my forged signature, loan documents listing my income and employment information without my knowledge, and bank records showing attempted withdrawals from accounts I had never authorized anyone to access. Amber had been building a parallel financial life using my identity while I remained completely unaware. But the most shocking discovery came when Sarah showed me the property transfer documents for my grandmother's house. The quitclaim deed had been executed not to protect the property for family use, but specifically to avoid proper legal review of the transaction. This type of transfer is often used to hide assets or avoid estate taxes, Sarah explained. But in this case, it looks like it was designed to move the property quickly before anyone could object or discover the financial irregularities surrounding your parents' other debts. I felt sick as the full picture emerged. My parents were in serious financial trouble, owing money they couldn't repay and facing foreclosure within 90 days. They had given the valuable house to Amber, not out of favoritism, but as part of a desperate scheme to protect an asset from creditors while tricking me into covering their debts. The house transfer might not even be legal, Sarah continued. If your parents were already insolvent when they transferred the property, it could be considered a fraudulent conveyance designed to hide assets from legitimate creditors. The legal implications were staggering. My family hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. They had committed multiple felonies that could result in prison time and financial ruin for all of them. But as Sarah explained the various charges that could be filed, I realized something that made my blood run cold. My extended family members started calling that afternoon with disturbing news. My cousin Jake had received a call from a debt collector looking for me. My Uncle Tom had been contacted by a credit card company asking about my employment status. Word was spreading through the family that I was somehow involved in serious financial problems, though no one understood what was happening. Amber's not just stealing from you, Sarah said grimly. She's setting you up to take the blame for all of this financial mess. If these debts go unpaid, your credit will be destroyed, and you could face legal consequences for fraudulent transactions you never made. The final twist came when Sarah ran a comprehensive credit check that revealed the true scope of the damage. Amber had been more thorough than we initially realized. She had used my information to open accounts at over a dozen financial institutions, take out personal loans, and even attempt to secure a business loan for a fake art gallery. Your credit score has already dropped from excellent to poor because of missed payments on accounts you don't even know about, Sarah informed me. If we don't act immediately, you could face bankruptcy foreclosure threats against your own apartment and potential criminal charges if creditors decide to pursue fraud cases. As I sat in Sarah's office that evening, surrounded by evidence of the most elaborate betrayal I could have imagined, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just about a house or mortgage payments anymore. This was about saving my entire financial future from a family that had decided to sacrifice me to cover their own mistakes and indulgences. The climactic revelation that Amber had been planning to destroy my credit and financial standing as part of her scheme filled me with a cold fury I had never experienced before. She hadn't just stolen my inheritance, she had tried to steal my entire future. But she had made one critical mistake. She had targeted someone who understood financial systems better than she did someone with the knowledge and resources to fight back. "What are our options?" I asked Sarah as she gathered the damning evidence into organized files. "We go to war," she replied simply. "But Tracy, you need to understand that this is going to get very ugly very quickly. We're talking about criminal charges that could send your sister to prison and implicate your parents as accessories. Are you prepared for that level of family devastation?" I looked at the mountain of forged documents, fraudulent loan applications, and evidence of systematic identity theft that represented years of planning and manipulation. My family had already made their choice about what they were willing to do to me. Now it was time for me to make mine. "Do it," I said. "All of it. I want every charge filed and every dollar recovered. They made this choice when they decided to commit felonies using my name. Now they get to face the consequences." Sarah wasted no time launching our legal assault. The next morning, she filed a comprehensive complaint with the police department, detailing the identity theft, elder abuse, and mortgage fraud. She also contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, as the interstate nature of some of Amber's activities meant federal charges could apply. "We're going to hit them from every possible angle," Sarah explained as we prepared our strategy. "Criminal charges for the fraud, civil lawsuits for damages, emergency injunctions to prevent further financial harm, and asset recovery actions to protect what's left of your family's legitimate resources." The first step was gathering additional evidence. Sarah hired a private investigator named Marcus Rodriguez, who specialized in financial crimes. Within 48 hours, Marcus had uncovered a paper trail that revealed the true scope of Amber's criminal enterprise. "Your sister is more sophisticated than we initially thought," Marcus reported during our first meeting. "She's been studying your financial habits for over a year, tracking your bank statements, monitoring your credit reports, and building detailed profiles of your spending patterns to make her fraudulent applications more believable." The evidence was damning. Marcus had found hidden recording devices in my parents' home that Amber had installed to capture family conversations about finances. She had been secretly photographing family documents, including tax returns and insurance policies, to gather the personal information needed for her identity theft scheme. But most disturbing of all, Marcus discovered that Amber had not been working alone. Her boyfriend, Derek, a man my family had never met, was experienced in financial fraud and had been coaching her through the process. Derek had a criminal history involving similar schemes in 2 other states and was currently wanted on outstanding warrants in California. "This is an amateur hour," Marcus explained. "Derek has been running variations of this con for years. He targets families with successful adult children, then manipulates one family member into providing access to financial information and family dynamics. Amber was just his latest accomplice." The revelation that my sister had been working with a professional criminal transformed our legal strategy completely. This wasn't just family drama that had gotten out of hand. This was organized crime that happened to involve family members. Sarah immediately contacted federal authorities, as Derek's interstate criminal activities meant this case now fell under federal jurisdiction. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was very interested in Derek's activities and eager to use our case to build a larger prosecution. While the legal machinery ground into motion, I had to deal with the immediate family fallout. My parents were completely panicked when they learned about the criminal investigation. My mother called me crying, hysterically begging me to work this out as a family instead of involving the authorities. "Tracy, please, we can fix this ourselves." Patricia sobbed over the phone. "We didn't know Amber was doing anything illegal. We thought we were just helping her get established. Can't we all sit down and work something out?" My father's approach was characteristically more aggressive. "You're destroying this family over money." Robert accused me during a heated phone call. "Your sister made some mistakes, but calling the police is going too far. We raised you better than this." But their pleas fell on deaf ears. The evidence Marcus had gathered proved that my parents had known about at least some of Amber's illegal activities. Bank records showed they had provided her with my social security number employment information and other personal details that she needed for her fraud schemes. More damaging still, we found recorded conversations between my parents and Amber, where they discussed how to manipulate me into paying for the house and other expenses. My mother's voice was clearly audible on one recording, saying, "Tracy's always been responsible about money. If we present this the right way, she'll probably agree to help rather than cause family drama." My extended family's reactions were mixed, but mostly supportive once they understood the full scope of what had been happening. My Aunt Linda was furious when she learned that Amber had been using family gatherings to gather information for her fraud schemes. "That little sociopath was taking pictures of family documents at Christmas dinner," Linda said angrily. "I thought she was just being sentimental about family memories. I had no idea she was stealing personal information to commit crimes." My cousin Jake felt guilty for believing Amber's stories about my supposed arrogance and selfishness. "She played us all," he admitted. "She made you sound like this cold, money-obsessed person who looked down on the family. Now I realize she was just setting up her con by making you the villain ahead of time." Uncle Tom was particularly helpful because he had kept detailed records of every financial request Amber had made over the past year. His documentation showed a clear pattern of escalating manipulation and increasingly elaborate lies about family situations that didn't exist. "She asked me for a $5,000 loan last month," Tom revealed. "She said you had refused to help your parents with emergency medical bills, and they were too proud to ask for help themselves. She made it sound like a temporary loan until she could convince you to do the right thing." The most valuable ally turned out to be my grandparents on my father's side, who'd been growing suspicious of Amber's behavior for months. They had noticed that she always seemed to know family financial information that hadn't been shared with her, and had started asking intrusive questions about inheritance plans and investment accounts. "We changed our will last month because something didn't feel right," my grandmother admitted during a difficult family meeting. "Amber had been asking too many questions about what we planned to leave to whom. When we told her our plans were private, she got angry in a way that scared us." But Amber's response to the investigation was where things took a truly dark turn. When she learned that criminal charges had been filed, she didn't show remorse or attempt to make amends. Instead, she doubled down on her criminal behavior and escalated to outright threats and intimidation. Derek moved into the inherited house with Amber, and neighbors began reporting suspicious activities. Strange men were coming and going at all hours. Expensive cars were parked in the driveway, despite Amber's supposed lack of income, and there were signs of ongoing criminal activities that extended far beyond the fraud against our family. Amber also launched a vicious social media campaign designed to destroy my reputation and paint herself as the victim of a vindictive sister. She posted elaborate stories about my supposed mental health issues, claimed I was jealous of her artistic success, and even suggested that I was abusing our elderly parents by involving law enforcement in family matters. "She's trying to intimidate you into dropping the charges," Sarah explained. "This is a common tactic among financial criminals when they realize they're caught. They attack the victim's credibility and try to make the cost of prosecution seem too high to continue." But Amber's intimidation campaign backfired spectacularly when Marcus discovered the truth about her supposed artistic career. Investigation revealed that Amber had never actually created any any of the artwork she claimed as her own. The pieces she displayed at family gatherings and posted on social media were either purchased from unknown artists or stolen from online portfolios. "Your sister isn't an artist at all," Marcus reported with grim satisfaction. "She's been buying cheap artwork online and claiming it as her own original work. Some of the pieces she's displayed are actually stolen from legitimate artists who have been trying to track down where their work disappeared to." This revelation was the final piece of evidence that proved Amber's entire persona was a carefully constructed lie designed to manipulate family sympathies and justify her financial dependence. She had never been the struggling artist trying to make it in an unsupportive world. She had been a career criminal using family connections to fund an increasingly elaborate lifestyle built on lies and theft. The climactic twist came when federal agents raided the house during one of Derek's visits. What they found inside transformed our family dispute into a major federal case that would make headlines across the state. The house was being used as a base of operations for an organized crime ring that had been defrauding elderly victims across multiple states. Derek and Amber had been running similar cons against dozens of families, stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars through identity theft, elder abuse, and mortgage fraud. Computer equipment seized during the raid contained detailed files on over 50 potential victims, including personal information, family financial profiles, and strategic plans for targeting specific individuals. Our family case was just one small part of a criminal enterprise that had been operating for over 3 years. Federal prosecutors were ecstatic. They had been trying to build a case against Derek's organization for months, and our evidence provided the breakthrough they needed to bring down the entire operation. Amber and Derek were looking at federal charges that could result in decades in prison. As I sat in Sarah's office reviewing the evidence that had been gathered, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. I had been right to fight back against my family's betrayal, but the scope of the criminal activity they had enabled was far worse than I could have imagined. My sister wasn't just a spoiled favorite child who had made bad decisions. She was a career criminal who had been using our family as cover for serious federal crimes. The battle lines were now clearly drawn. On one side stood justice, accountability, and the rule of law. On the other side stood my family's misguided attempts to protect a criminal who had been manipulating them from the very beginning. There was no middle ground left and no possibility of working things out quietly within the family. The war was about to begin in earnest. The federal raid on my grandmother's house made the evening news, and suddenly our family drama became public knowledge throughout the community. The local television station ran a story about organized financial fraud, targeting elderly families with Derek and Amber's arrest photos prominently displayed alongside footage of FBI agents carrying computers and boxes of evidence from the property. My parents were devastated by the public attention and completely overwhelmed by the scope of what they had unwittingly enabled. My mother spent 3 days in bed, unable to face the reality that her favorite daughter was facing federal charges. My father alternated between rage at me for destroying the family and confusion about how things had gone so wrong so quickly. "We just wanted to help Amber find her place in the world," Patricia said during a tearful phone call after the arrests. "We never imagined she was involved in anything criminal. How could we have known?" But the evidence Sarah and Marcus had compiled told a different story. Bank records recorded conversations and witness statements proved that my parents had ignored numerous red flags and actively participated in covering up Amber's suspicious activities for months. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case was Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, a tough career prosecutor who specialized in complex financial crimes. During our first meeting, she made it clear that the case against Derek and Amber was solid, but she needed my parents' cooperation to ensure the strongest possible prosecution. "Your parents are in a difficult position," Jennifer explained. "They could face charges as accessories if they don't cooperate fully with our investigation. But if they testify truthfully about what they knew and when they knew it, we're willing to consider immunity in exchange for their testimony." The pressure on my parents to come clean about their involvement was intense. Sarah arranged for them to meet with their own attorney, and slowly the full truth began to emerge about how deeply they had been manipulated and how much they had chosen to overlook. During a series of painful family meetings supervised by attorneys, my parents finally admitted the extent of their knowledge about Amber's illegal activities. They had known she was using my personal information without permission. They had provided her with family financial documents that she needed for her fraud schemes, and they had ignored obvious signs that her lifestyle couldn't be supported by her legitimate income. Amber told us she had online art sales that generated income. My father testified during a deposition. When we asked for details, she said it was complicated and involved international buyers who valued privacy. We wanted to believe her success was real, so we didn't ask the hard questions we should have asked. My mother's testimony was even more damning. She admitted that Amber had explicitly asked for my social security number and employment information, claiming she needed it for family financial planning and insurance purposes. Patricia had provided the information without checking with me first. "I thought it was normal for sisters to share that kind of information," she said tearfully. "Amber made it sound like you had already agreed to be included in some kind of family financial arrangement. I realize now that I should have verified that with you directly." The federal investigation also revealed the true scope of Derek's criminal organization. Computer forensics showed that they had been running similar operations in California, Nevada, and Arizona, targeting families with successful adult children who could be manipulated into covering debts and expenses for their struggling relatives. They had detailed profiles on over 60 families. Marcus reported during a case update meeting. They studied family dynamics for months before making their move, identifying which family members were most likely to feel guilty about their success and most vulnerable to manipulation. Derek's criminal history was extensive. He had been running financial scams for over a decade, constantly moving from state to state and adapting his methods as law enforcement caught up with his previous schemes. Amber was just his latest recruit, chosen specifically because her family situation provided ideal cover for their operations. But Amber's arrest didn't end her attempts to manipulate the situation in her favor. From jail, she continued trying to control family narratives and escape consequences for her actions. She called my parents daily, crying and claiming that Derek had forced her to participate against her will. She insisted that she was the real victim and that I was being vindictive by cooperating with prosecutors. "She's still trying to work the con," Sarah observed after listening to recorded jail phone calls that were available as evidence. "Even facing federal charges, she's attempting to manipulate your parents into believing she's the victim and you're the villain." The manipulation might have worked if not for the overwhelming evidence that proved Amber had been planning and executing financial crimes long before she met Derek. Bank records showed she had been stealing small amounts of money from family members for over 2 years, gradually escalating to larger and more sophisticated schemes as her confidence grew. My extended family's support was crucial during this phase of the legal process. Uncle Tom, Aunt Linda, Cousin Jake, and my grandparents all testified about Amber's pattern of lies and manipulation, stretching back several years. Their testimony established that Derek hadn't corrupted an innocent young woman. He had found a willing partner who was already engaged in criminal behavior. Amber borrowed $2,000 from me 3 years ago for what she said was an emergency dental procedure. Uncle Tom testified. "She showed me fake medical bills and even fake insurance documents. When I found out later that she had never had any dental work done, she claimed there had been a misunderstanding and promised to pay me back. That money never came." The civil lawsuits we filed parallel to the criminal case were equally devastating for Amber's attempts to portray herself as a victim. Asset recovery proceedings revealed that she had been living a lavish lifestyle, funded entirely by fraud with no legitimate income sources at all. Forensic accountants traced every dollar Amber had spent over the past 18 months, documenting expensive shopping trips, luxury spa treatments, designer clothes, and high-end electronics that she could never have afforded on her retail salary. The evidence painted a picture of someone who felt entitled to an expensive lifestyle and was willing to commit serious crimes to maintain it. But the most shocking revelation came when investigators discovered that Amber had been secretly planning to flee the country. Hidden in her personal belongings were fake identification documents, foreign currency, and detailed research about countries that didn't have extradition treaties with the United States. She was preparing to disappear once the fraud was discovered, Jennifer explained during a prosecution update meeting. The house transfer and mortgage scheme weren't just about getting money from your family. They were designed to buy time while she prepared to escape prosecution entirely. Bank records showed that Amber had been systematically liquidating assets and converting them to untraceable forms of currency. She had sold jewelry, electronics, and other valuables, then used cash transactions to avoid leaving paper trails that investigators could follow. Derek's arrest had disrupted their escape plans, but evidence suggested they had been preparing to disappear within weeks of being caught. International flight reservations found on seized computers showed they had planned to travel to South America using false identities. If you hadn't acted when you did, Sarah pointed out, they would have disappeared completely, leaving your family to deal with hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent debts and no way to recover any of the stolen money. The federal sentencing guidelines for Derek and Amber's crimes were severe. Derek faced up to 25 years in prison for his role as the leader of the criminal organization. Amber faced 12 to 15 years for her role as a co-conspirator and for the specific crimes she had committed against our family. But beyond the criminal charges, the civil asset forfeiture proceedings meant that everything they had purchased with stolen money would be seized and sold to compensate victims. The house would be returned to my parents' estate. All of Amber's possessions would be liquidated, and even Derek's expensive cars and electronic equipment would be sold at auction. The climactic moment of this phase came during Amber's attempt to negotiate a plea bargain. Rather than accepting responsibility for her actions, she tried one final manipulation by claiming that she had information about other criminal activities that could help prosecutors build cases against additional defendants. She's trying to trade information for a reduced sentence, Jennifer explained. But the problem is that everything she's claiming to know about is either information we already have or completely fabricated stories designed to make herself seem more valuable as a cooperating witness. Amber's lies were quickly exposed when investigators checked her claims against existing evidence. She had invented elaborate stories about additional criminals and fictional schemes that had never existed. Her desperation to avoid consequences had led her to fabricate evidence which only added additional charges for obstruction of justice to her already lengthy list of federal crimes. The realization that Amber would continue lying and manipulating even when facing decades in prison was the final confirmation that my decision to fight back had been absolutely correct. She wasn't a misguided family member who had made bad decisions. She was a hardened criminal who felt no remorse for the devastation she had caused and would continue causing harm if given any opportunity. As the federal case moved toward trial, one thing became crystal clear. There would be no reconciliation, no family healing, and no happy ending that included Amber returning to the fold. She had made choices that put her permanently outside the boundaries of acceptable behavior, and the consequences of those choices would follow her for the rest of her life. But for me, watching the legal system methodically dismantle the criminal enterprise that had targeted my family was deeply satisfying. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, every court filing brought me closer to complete vindication and full recovery of everything that had been stolen from me. The war was almost over and justice was winning. The trial lasted 3 weeks and became the most high-profile federal fraud case in our region in over a decade. Local and state media covered the proceedings, extensively fascinated by the story of an organized crime ring that had used family manipulation as their primary weapon against victims. Derek pled guilty to all federal charges in exchange for a sentence of 20 years without the possibility of parole. His cooperation with federal investigators helped authorities identify and arrest additional members of his criminal organization, operating in other states, leading to what prosecutors called the largest elder fraud bust in the region's history. Amber's trial was more complex because she insisted on fighting the charges and maintained her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. Her defense attorney tried to argue that she had been manipulated by Derek and was as much a victim as the families they had defrauded, but the evidence Sarah and Marcus had compiled made that argument impossible to sustain. Testimony from family members' bank records showing years of financial manipulation and recorded conversations proving her active participation in planning criminal activities painted a clear picture of someone who was a willing and enthusiastic participant in serious financial crimes. The most devastating moment of the trial came when prosecutors played recordings of phone calls Amber had made from jail to my parents. Instead of expressing remorse or accepting responsibility, the calls revealed her continued attempts to manipulate family members and escape consequences for her actions. In one particularly damaging recording, Amber could be heard telling my mother, "If Tracy really loved this family, she would have just paid the mortgage and kept quiet about everything else. This is all happening because she's jealous and vindictive. She's destroying the family over money." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Amber was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 12 years. The judge specifically noted the sophisticated nature of the crimes and the complete lack of remorse shown by the defendant. Ms. Amber showed a callous disregard for the welfare of her own family members and elderly victims throughout multiple states. Judge Harrison stated during sentencing, her crimes were not impulsive mistakes, but carefully planned felonies that destroyed the financial security and emotional well-being of dozens of families. The civil asset forfeiture proceedings moved more quickly than anyone expected. Within 6 months of the criminal convictions, federal marshals had seized and liquidated all assets purchased with stolen money. The total recovery exceeded $450,000, which was distributed among victims according to a court-approved formula. My family received full restitution for all fraudulent debts and financial losses, plus additional compensation for legal fees and emotional distress. The inherited house was returned to my parents' estate with a clear title, and all the fraudulent loans and credit accounts opened in my name were officially voided and removed from my credit history. But the most important aspect of the financial recovery was what it meant for my parents' future security. The restitution funds allowed them to pay off their legitimate debts, avoid foreclosure on their own home, and rebuild their retirement savings that had been depleted by years of supporting Amber's criminal lifestyle. My parents' emotional recovery was much more complicated than the financial aspects of the case. They struggled with guilt over their role in enabling Amber's crimes and shame over how badly they had treated me, while favoring a daughter who was systematically destroying the family's financial future. My father, Robert, began attending therapy to address what his counselor identified as a pattern of enabling behavior that stretched back to Amber's childhood. He started recognizing how his tendency to make excuses for her bad behavior had prevented her from learning to accept responsibility for her actions. I realize now that we never actually helped Amber by constantly bailing her out of trouble, he admitted during one of our supervised family counseling sessions. We taught her that she could get away with anything as long as she told us the right sob story. We created the monster that ultimately destroyed our family. My mother Patricia's journey was even more difficult because she had been the primary target of Amber's emotional manipulation. Counseling revealed that she had been systematically gaslit and psychologically abused by her own daughter for years, trained to doubt her own perceptions and instincts about Amber's behavior. Amber had me convinced that questioning her was the same as not loving her, Patricia explained tearfully during family therapy. Whenever I started to wonder about her stories or her lifestyle, she would cry and talk about how hard it was to be the artistic child in a practical family. I was so afraid of crushing her spirit that I stopped trusting my own judgment. The family counseling sessions were emotionally brutal but necessary for any hope of rebuilding relationships. My parents had to confront not just their enabling of Amber's criminal behavior, but also their lifetime pattern of favoritism and the damage it had done to me and our family dynamics. I had to work through my own anger and resentment about years of being treated as the lesser daughter, the one whose achievements didn't matter as much as Amber's happiness. The validation of being proven right about Amber's character was satisfying, but it couldn't undo decades of emotional neglect and minimization. Your parents used you as the responsible child who could take care of herself while they focused all their energy on the problem, child who demanded constant attention. Our family therapist explained. They didn't realize they were teaching you that your needs didn't matter as much as your sister's wants. Rebuilding trust required my parents to acknowledge specific instances where they had treated me unfairly and to understand how their favoritism had affected my self-worth and my ability to feel valued within the family. It was painful for all of us, but it was also necessary for any hope of moving forward together. My extended family relationships healed more quickly because they had been victims of Amber's manipulation rather than willing participants in it. Uncle Tom, Aunt Linda, Cousin Jake, and my grandparents were all relieved to understand what had really been happening and eager to rebuild authentic relationships based on honesty instead of the lies Amber had been spreading for years. We all knew something felt off about Amber's stories, Aunt Linda admitted, but she was so good at making anyone who questioned her feel like they were being unsupportive or mean-spirited. She had this way of making you feel guilty for not believing her completely. The broader community response was overwhelmingly supportive. Neighbors, coworkers, and friends who had followed the case through media coverage expressed admiration for my willingness to fight back against family manipulation and hold criminals accountable, regardless of their relationship to me. My professional reputation was actually enhanced by the case because my employer saw how I had used my financial expertise to identify and document complex fraud schemes. I received a promotion to senior analyst and was asked to develop training programs to help other employees recognize signs of financial manipulation in their own families. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from other fraud victims who reached out to share their own stories and thank me for fighting back in a way that had helped law enforcement build stronger cases against financial criminals. Several families credited my willingness to prosecute with giving them the courage to report similar crimes instead of trying to handle them privately. You showed us that protecting family members from consequences doesn't actually help them. One victim wrote to me, "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their choices, even when it's painful." The ripple effects of the case extended far beyond our family situation. Federal prosecutors used the evidence and legal strategies developed in our case to build similar prosecutions against elder fraud rings in other regions. The case became a training example for law enforcement agencies, learning to recognize and investigate family-based financial abuse. Legislative changes were also implemented as a result of the case. State lawmakers strengthened penalties for identity theft between family members and created new protections for elderly victims of financial manipulation by their own adult children. My parents eventually sold the inherited house and used the proceeds to establish a scholarship fund for students from troubled families who were working their way through college. They wanted to create something positive from the devastation Amber had caused and to honor the importance of education and personal responsibility. The climactic moment of this phase came exactly 1 year after Amber's sentencing, when my parents received a letter she had written from federal prison. Instead of accepting responsibility or expressing genuine remorse, the letter was another attempt at manipulation filled with self-pity and blame, directed at everyone except herself. "She still doesn't understand what she did wrong," my father said sadly after reading the letter aloud during a family counseling session. "Even facing 12 more years in prison, she still believes she's the victim and everyone else is responsible for her problems." That letter was the final confirmation that we had made the right decisions throughout this painful process. Amber had been given every opportunity to accept responsibility, express genuine remorse, and work toward making amends for her crimes. Instead, she had chosen to continue lying, manipulating, and blaming others for consequences that resulted directly from her own criminal choices. My parents made the difficult but healthy decision not to respond to the letter or to maintain any contact with Amber during her incarceration. They realized that continuing to enable her victim mentality would prevent any possibility of genuine rehabilitation and would only cause additional harm to the family members she had already devastated. As we approached the second anniversary of that shocking text message that had started this entire legal battle, I reflected on how much had changed and how much stronger our family had become through the process of confronting hard truths about ourselves and our relationships. The reckoning had been painful but necessary. Truth, accountability, and justice had prevailed over manipulation, favoritism, and criminal behavior. We had learned that real love sometimes requires saying no, setting boundaries, and refusing to enable destructive behavior even when it involves people we care about. 3 years have passed since that devastating text message changed my life forever, and I can honestly say that fighting back was the best decision I ever made for myself and my family. What began as a shocking betrayal became an opportunity for genuine healing and the creation of healthier relationships based on honesty instead of manipulation. My parents and I have rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine appreciation for each other's strengths and contributions. They completed 2 years of family therapy and individual counseling to address the enabling behaviors and favoritism patterns that had made our family vulnerable to Amber's manipulation in the first place. My mother, Patricia, has become a passionate advocate for elder financial abuse prevention. She volunteers at a local senior center teaching other elderly people how to recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation by family members. Her firsthand experience with being victimized by her own daughter gives her credibility and empathy that helps other victims feel less ashamed about similar experiences. I understand how easy it is to make excuses for adult children who seem to be struggling, she tells the families she counsels, but I learned the hard way that protecting people from the consequences of their bad choices doesn't actually help them. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no and mean it. My father, Robert, has found purpose in mentoring other parents who are dealing with adult children who show signs of manipulation and entitlement. He speaks at parenting workshops about the dangers of favoritism and the importance of teaching all children accountability and personal responsibility from an early age. I spent so many years trying to make life easier for Amber that I never taught her how to handle difficulties on her own. He reflects during one of our monthly family dinners. I thought I was being a good father by solving her problems, but I was actually preventing her from developing the character she needed to become a good person. Our family dinners have become a treasured tradition that brings together extended family members who are also affected by Amber's deception and manipulation. Uncle Tom, Aunt Linda, Cousin Jake, and my grandparents all participate in rebuilding family relationships based on honesty, transparency, and genuine care for each other's well-being. We've established family ground rules that prevent future manipulation and financial abuse. All major financial decisions are discussed openly with multiple family members present. No one is allowed to request money or personal information without clear documentation and legitimate reasons. And most importantly, we've all agreed that family loyalty means protecting each other from harm, not enabling destructive behavior. My career has flourished beyond my wildest expectations. My employer promoted me to Director of Financial Compliance, and I've developed a national reputation as an expert in family-based financial fraud prevention. I speak at conferences across the country sharing our story and teaching other professionals how to recognize and investigate similar schemes. The nonprofit organization I established to help fraud victims has assisted over 200 families in recovering stolen assets and holding criminals accountable. We provide legal support, emotional counseling and practical guidance for people who are struggling with the devastating realization that family members have been stealing from them. Your story gave me the courage to fight back, a recent client told me. I thought I had to choose between protecting my family and protecting myself. You showed me that sometimes protecting yourself is protecting your family. My personal life has also been transformed by the experience. The strength and clarity I developed during the legal battle helped me recognize my own worth and refuse to accept relationships that didn't honor my value and contributions. I'm now engaged to Michael, a wonderful man who appreciates my intelligence, integrity, and determination. Michael is also an attorney who specializes in white-collar crime, and he has tremendous respect for how I handled the situation with my family. He often says that my willingness to do the right thing, even when it was painful and costly, showed him the kind of character he wanted in a life partner. You could have just paid that mortgage and avoided all the conflict, he pointed out during one of our early conversations about the case. But you understood that enabling criminal behavior hurts everyone involved, including the criminals themselves. That kind of moral courage is rare and beautiful. We're planning a wedding that will include my parents, grandparents, and extended family members who stood by me during the darkest parts of this experience. The guest list represents people who value honesty, accountability, and genuine love over manipulation, favoritism, and false peace. Amber is now in her 4th year of federal incarceration and will not be eligible for parole for 8 more years. She has written several letters to family members over the years, but they all follow the same pattern of self-pity and blame that characterized her letter after sentencing. She has shown no genuine remorse or acceptance of responsibility for the devastation she caused. My parents and I have maintained our decision not to respond to her letters or maintain any contact during her incarceration. We've learned that true love sometimes requires allowing people to face the full consequences of their choices without interference or rescue attempts. If Amber ever develops genuine remorse and wants to make real amends for what she did, we'll be open to that conversation, my father has said. But until she stops playing the victim and starts accepting responsibility, any contact would just enable her to continue hurting people. The financial recovery from the case allowed my parents to rebuild their retirement security and establish the scholarship fund that has now helped 15 young people complete their college educations. The scholarship specifically targets students who have overcome family dysfunction and are working to break cycles of manipulation and irresponsibility in their own lives. We wanted something good to come from the terrible things Amber did, my mother explains to scholarship recipients. Your success represents hope that people can choose different paths and create better futures regardless of what their families taught them. My own financial situation has recovered completely and grown stronger than ever. My credit score is back to excellent, my savings have grown substantially, and I've purchased a beautiful home that I share with Michael. The experience taught me valuable lessons about protecting my financial privacy and setting firm boundaries around money with family members. More importantly, the experience taught me that self-worth cannot be dependent on other people's approval or validation. For too many years, I had sought my parents' recognition and appreciation while accepting their neglect and minimization of my achievements. Fighting back forced me to recognize my own value and demand that others treat me with the respect I deserved. You stop trying to earn love from people who are never going to give it fairly, our family therapist observed during one of our final sessions. When you started protecting yourself instead of trying to please them, you actually made it possible for them to develop genuine respect for you. The legal precedents established by our case have been cited in over 30 similar prosecutions across the country. Federal prosecutors now use our evidence and legal strategies as templates for building cases against family-based financial abuse rings. The case has become a training example for law enforcement agencies learning to investigate elder fraud and identity theft. Legislative changes inspired by our case have strengthened penalties for financial crimes between family members and created new resources for elderly victims of manipulation by their own adult children. Several states have passed Amber's laws that specifically address the use of emotional manipulation and false family emergencies to commit financial fraud. Looking back on that shocking text message that started this entire journey, I can see how it was actually a gift in disguise. It forced me to confront family dynamics that had been unhealthy for decades and gave me the opportunity to build genuine relationships based on mutual respect instead of manipulation and favoritism. The pain of discovering my family's betrayal was intense, but it was temporary. The strength, confidence, and healthy relationships I built through fighting back have become permanent improvements to my life that will benefit me for decades to come. I often think about what would have happened if I had just agreed to pay that mortgage. Amber and Derek would have continued their criminal enterprise, victimizing more families and stealing more money. My parents would have remained vulnerable to future manipulation, and I would have enabled criminal behavior while teaching my family that my financial security and personal boundaries didn't matter. Instead, fighting back saved multiple families from future victimization, held criminals accountable for their choices, forced my parents to confront their enabling behaviors, and gave me the opportunity to build genuine self-respect and healthy relationships. The most important lesson I learned is that love without accountability isn't actually love at all. It's enabling that hurts everyone involved. Real love requires the courage to set boundaries, enforce consequences, and refuse to participate in destructive behavior even when it involves people we care about. True family loyalty means protecting each other from harm, including the harm that comes from avoiding responsibility for bad choices. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is allow them to face the natural consequences of their actions without interference or rescue attempts. Today I live with the deep satisfaction of knowing that I chose truth over false peace, justice over family manipulation, and self-respect over people-pleasing. The temporary pain of fighting back has been replaced by permanent improvements to my life, my relationships, and my contribution to protecting other families from similar devastation. When that text message arrived 3 years ago demanding that I pay for my sister's house, I had a choice between enabling criminal behavior or fighting for justice. I chose to fight, and that choice has made all the difference in creating a life filled with authentic relationships, genuine respect, and the deep peace that comes from living according to your values, even when it's difficult. Sometimes, the most important battles are the ones we fight within our own families, and sometimes, winning those battles requires the courage to risk losing relationships that were built on unhealthy foundations. But when you fight for truth and accountability, you create space for relationships that are built on genuine love and mutual respect. That's a victory worth fighting for and a lesson worth sharing with anyone who faces the difficult choice between keeping false peace and demanding genuine justice. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what you knew was right? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and share it with others who might benefit from hearing about the importance of setting boundaries with family members. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength and courage in difficult family situations. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that you always have the power to choose truth over manipulation, no matter how difficult that choice might be.